All right, with that, we will call the Tuolumne County Transit Agency to order. Oral communication, allowing the public to speak on any item not on the printed agenda. This would be that time or that opportunity. All right, seeing none, we'll go to consent calendar. Approval of the June 14, 2017 meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Doesn't look like it. All right, regular agenda, progress report on the construction of the Tuolumne Transit Center.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we had a construction meeting earlier with the project team. I'm going to have Tyler report on how it's going, but I did want to point out in attachments, you do have a very detailed breakout of both our funding and expenditures to date, as well as some of the anticipated expenditures that we've committed to, like the concrete floors, but we haven't executed a contract at this point. So with that, you'll see that we have approximately $179,000 remaining in fund balance on that project fund. Tyler, you want to give us an update?
Sure. Thank you. Well, the good news is, as your executive director shared, we've got about $180,000 left, and we're about 95% done. So we don't anticipate needing too much more of that remaining fund balance, although you will see a few of the items listed there, line items that still remain. The focus at this point in the project has moved from the building itself to the road project. As you're aware, we kind of flipped projects A and B to B and A to allow us to move forward when we weren't able to get the PG&E drawings that we needed. Now that we have the PG&E drawings and the detail, the trenches are being dug, the conduit's being extended, and all that work is currently taking place on site. So at this point, to move from where we're at 95% to 100%, will be dictated by the road schedule and the final approvals by the PG&E inspectors, so they can bring power to the site and we can start actually testing, a lot of the items that are on site, mechanical and electrical and everything that is there waiting for power now. Vindicated a few of the final items that are still to come. As you're aware, we've got some furniture that is being designed and fabricated by local artists now. We met with metal makers earlier today, and we're excited about that product. We've got a bid out right now for polishing the floors, exposing some of that concrete aggregate. Will look really nice, and so those are the last two kind of big ticket items for your transit center, other than some of the fiber optics that the IT department will be helping us to pull off, but you'll see that here in your spreadsheet.
Do we have any time frame on the road? I've seen them out there digging and doing a lot of dust, but do they know when they'll get it?
I think according to the project schedule we looked at today, the date is September 20th. That's a bit further out than we'd like to think we need, but that is pending kind of a large review period for PG&E to actually come in and inspect, and I think they're doing what they can to shorten that timeline for us, but hopefully a worst case scenario would be September 20th.
I think just to clarify, September 20th is completion of the project as a whole. I think what I heard today is they've got about another week of trenching on PG&E and conduit poles, and then a few days after that they'll start the road construction itself, and paving would happen. I think they're looking at end of the month. So we're getting real close to having a paved road, and once we have a paved road, now our bus bays and our walkways, the sidewalk, everything can begin to join up and have a nice complete looking site.
I have two questions. The first one is, all of the things that aren't finished yet, are they all budgeted for? Yes. Okay.
There's one notation that I would point out is you have $5,000 in what we call the network video recorder. That we've gotten some updated cost estimates with that. That's being they're putting in the camera and the conduits and all those things, but the recorder itself and some of the other, what I'll call technology equipment that allows us to then look at it from our computers at our desk or from the transit center, that's going to be supplied by, it's owner supplied, and we're working with our IT department. That number grew a little bit last time I looked at. What are we up to on that?
So that would be an additional 10,000.
An additional 10,000. But we've talked about also using some of our security grant money for that. You can't get any better fit for security grant than security cameras.
Okay. And then maybe the rest of the group up here know what the emergency blue light phone is. Can you explain that so that I and the general public know what that is?
Yeah, and Tyler, you can jump in anytime. It's something you see more on college campuses and big parking lots and whatnot. But you do see them in public facilities too, where somebody might be out there kind of alone and they're scared for whatever reason. They pick it up and they're on with dispatch at that point. It's a one-way phone call. As soon as you pick up, you're on the phone with dispatch.
Okay.
Tell them you've got an emergency out there.
I think we used to call those tie lines or something. But anyway.
I think it says emergency down the side of it and different things. So very prominently located right in the center of our site.
Okay. Thank you.
George, anything? On the polishing of the floor, I've just got one concern. My mind is going, you polish it, you make it nice and smooth. Smooth equals slippery.
Yeah, I think you'll know, if you look at Walmart has recently polished their floor as a result of their
Okay.
expansion. Now that's kind of a low gloss. They can put like a pigment in it to give it some grittiness.
Okay.
This is pretty
Retraction.
common in office buildings and whatnot. And I might add, it was what Evan recommended for the flooring treatment out there too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's no maintenance is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
Any more update?
Just, we were out there today, and a lot of the finishing lights and different things are all coming together, and the word I hear for Tyler say, it looks sweet. It's nice.
So maybe a road or something in a couple weeks?
A road? Yeah, road by the end of the
Some
month.
kind of paving?
So when you get that road in, could you let us know, and maybe I'd like to go out and take a look at it?
Yeah.
I don't want to get my car
I think
dirty now.
you'll love the way it looks. It's so beautiful and impressive, and we did everything we could to keep costs down, but a lot of thanks to Tyler for pushing us to do something a little nicer. And he has a real element for design, and of course, Evan and you, John, and Bill Kenny before that all helped and contributed. The site looks fantastic. You'll be very proud of it.
And how's the furniture coming along?
Well, it took us a while to get all of the insurance and indemnification, everything lined up. I think it was Metal Maker's first time going through that process. He was vaguely familiar with it because he works at a college. He's seen that but he's never been on the other end of that, of having to put those docs together.
Right.
So we had some delays in that regards. We just looked at some of the drawings today, made some suggestions on design. So I think we're pretty close on the outdoor furniture. Some of the indoor furniture we still need to kind of see some designs for. Eric needs to be comfortable in delivering on a timely basis, especially with the outdoor stuff. He's going to probably have in a week or so a prototype of the furniture in our office, just of what the benches will look like, and then we'll keep them in the office, let people sit in them, try them, and get feedback from the staff and whatnot. Are they comfortable? Is there anything we would change about them before we say, yeah, this is a go? So it's coming along, and we've talked about adding some interesting touches to the furniture so it has kind of a custom look to it.
Darren, has the furniture been all through the eye of the male, or perhaps females have a different view of furniture? I'm just wondering if you had any input from the other gender.
You been talking to my wife? Well, I think that's partly why we're going to bring in the office. Denise knows that we want her input and any of the other ladies in the office to look at it and kind of give their input on design. And certainly I'll let you guys know when it's there. You can give me input too.
I don't think the general population of any project really takes all that into consideration. If that were the case, they need to take into consideration back problems, neck problems, all kinds of other
And you get a
problems.
good clue on what's at the Visitors Bureau. There's some very nice-looking furniture that they made.
Yeah.
I was there a week or so ago, and I was very impressed. You wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
There's a nice bench out front, too.
Pretty good stuff.
Do you want to add anything to that?
All right, anything else on the transit center?
Nothing.
All right, seeing none, looks like, any public comment?
Just real quick, I wanted to mention, you probably read in the news already, we did get approval of our cap and trade funding for transit services to Pinecrest Basin. We were hoping to get that kind of in late April. For whatever reason, it was delayed, that approval. Here we are midsummer. We're just going to look towards next year, and that'll give us a chance to really work with the forest supervisor up there and some of his staff, the vendors, merchants, and concessionaires, and everybody, and get everybody on the same page on what exactly we're going to do with the funding that we have.
So the allocation's been awarded. When does it have to be spent by, say?
I don't think there's a timeline on that.
Yeah,
Maybe a couple years. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have it spent.
I just was surprised when they awarded it June 30th.
Yeah, and relatedly, I should probably point out that it looks like there's agreement in the legislature with the governor on a renewal of cap and trade legislation through 2030. I've seen some drafts of legislation. For whatever it's worth, it looks to me like kind of a status quo from a funding to transportation standpoint. We'll get a little bump in transit funds for specialized services, and then we'll just compete for funds through the Energy Commission and Strategic Growth Council and California Air Resources Board and all these other agencies that we never worked with in the past. So that's what we'll be doing on cap and trade.
Okay.
That's it for reports. So, Tyler?
Just two quick updates. One, we provided service to the Motherlode Fair this last weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was our busiest service weekend we've had since serving the fair. Friday night and then good part of the day on Saturday and Sunday. And I think the contractor said we delivered over 550 rides, so that was good to see. And worked closely with the fair staff, and so we appreciated that coordination. And as you guys have maybe been reading about, Yosemite has been incredibly busy this year. A lot of folks going in to see the waterfalls and just check out the majesty that is Yosemite. That has translated into just enormous ridership increases for us this year. I mean, we're not surprised because we've been heavily marketing with the Visitors Bureau, and they're really good at what they do. We were up 113% from May of last year to May of this year. And of course, May of last year was the biggest May we'd had since we started the service. So to say that we doubled our service was, quite a feat. Just got the numbers for June, and although we didn't do 113% growth, we did do 106% growth from 2,500 rides to 5,200 rides. And that is basically 3 buses going into the park, 3 buses coming in, and a good portion of those are almost entirely full, each individual run in and of itself. So that's really pretty impressive when you're seeing numbers like 277 and 300 is basically you're as full as you can get each and every direction. So we like seeing and hearing that. Of course, that means a lot of folks are trying to get into the park. So for folks who haven't gone into the park and are thinking about that, this may be a great alternative for them, knowing that there are some kind of vehicle impacts trying to get in at this point. A lot of folks going, and the nature of the park means everyone's heading in the same direction. So on these busy days, they open the bus lane, which allows the Arts bus to save everybody some time there. So we're pleased about that, and and the last thing on that is we have also been leading all 4 corridors on the online front. The number of trips being booked online and the percentage of our capacity that's being booked out. We are beating, much larger areas like Fresno and Merced, Madera. So we're encouraged
Geez,
by
I remember
that.
a time that would never work.
Yeah.
Easy,
So,
John.
thank you for your support of that service.
So, on the yards, where do people go to find out about it?
They can go to yarts.com directly, or they can go to tuolumnecountytransit.com and go to the Yosemite bus page and find out information from there. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have any numbers on which is the busiest pickup spots?
Well, we know from years past that the busiest spots are RV parks, and typically Thousand Trails and Yosemite Pines RV Park in the greater Groveland area historically have been our largest producers. We are still waiting for some of this finer grain detail from the yards contractor, so we know exactly how many folks are getting on in Sonora, how many are getting on in Jamestown, and when we get that information, we'll report it. And so sorry we don't have that yet. Yeah.
If I might add, Tyler and the Visitors Bureau, along with the merchants, have all been promoting transit on our corridor, I think at a level that we're not seeing on the other corridors. So all those folks deserve a big pat on the back and good job. So that's worth noting. And then finally, I just want to also mention that the Merced River Plan does call for up to 4 round trips on 120 for the buses. We're at 3 right now. With the kind of numbers we're seeing, might be time to start talking about a 4th service, 4th run. Tyler's going to be up at the Yosemite Gateway Partners meeting tomorrow, and we'll kind of prime some of those issues.
I won't be there. I have a scheduled doctor's appointment, 2 of them, and I can't miss them. So carry the torch, would you?
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll adjourn the Tuolumne County Transit Agency part of the agenda. And we'll convene the Tuolumne County Transportation Council. And this would be the opportunity for oral communication, allowing the public to speak on any item not on the printed agenda. This would be that opportunity. Seeing none, we'll bring it to the consent calendar, approval of the June 14, 2017 meeting minutes.
I'll move approval of the June 14th meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. And regular agenda, item 3, SB1 funding discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as you know, in May, the governor signed Senate Bill 1, which provides for increases in gas taxes beginning in November, and as well as increases or corrections to the existing gas tax, paybacks of prior loans from the transportation account to the state general fund, or we'll see paybacks coming in there. There'll be increases in vehicle registration fees and perhaps other new revenue sources. This is the biggest piece of transportation funding that we've seen in a very, very long time. And we've begun to work with Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission to implement the new funding programs. Even though they're not quite here yet, they're beginning to have estimates of what the revenues will be in a few different sources. And there's a timeline I think I've attached in here of all the different meetings that are scheduled around the state. And I'll talk a little bit about how different programs are rolling out at this point. And jump in at any time to ask questions. But I thought it was appropriate time to kind of check in, let you know how it's moving forward and where we fit into all of that. So I'm going to work off of the attachments that I have. First item is active transportation program augmentation. In this program, there's about $100 million per year added. The active transportation program is for constructing bicycle and pedestrian facilities in communities. They've developed some guidelines, and they've actually issued a call for project applications for funding. What's good about this particular call for projects is that they are only opening it up to projects that have previously applied for funding, that either want to move forward, and maybe they were successful previously and they just want to implement a faster schedule, or they were scored out but did not make the cut list. And in this case, none of the projects submitted by the county or the city were funded in the last cycle. So there's opportunities to resubmit those projects, particularly the city's project up at Red Church has some safety enhancements for pedestrians up in that area, consistent with the Vision Sonora plan. It's about $700,000 to $800,000 in improvements was the grant application. They've been encouraged, and I know the city staff are working on getting a grant application together. What's key here is if they can somehow get the project done in the first 2 years, or at least out to bid by the end or spring of 2019, they're almost assured funding on that project. If it stretches out into the 3-year time frame, you might get funding. So there's a very important distinction in how that application goes forward. The county is also looking at resubmitting a grant application for walkways associated with the Fifth Avenue Signal Project and improvements to Fifth Avenue Connect that will allow people that are maybe along some of the housing in Jamestown Road, Golf Links Road, Wigwam Road areas. They'll be able to walk down potentially and access some of the sidewalk and go over across the highway, maybe go to the school or even downtown. So it'll provide that connection that is vitally important in that community, and hopefully they'll do well. Move on to the next area, which is the local partnership program. In this program, 50% of it is competitive, 50% is by formula. This is a program that provides $200 million per year is available, and it's incentive money for communities to have a voter-approved sales tax measure or perhaps a regional traffic impact fee program. As you know, we have one, and in that regional transportation impact fee program, we have some projects on the state highway that were envisioned being 50% developer fees, 50% state funds. So this fits very nicely. They're working on the guidelines. We don't see anything happening for at least a year in terms of funding applications. We probably won't be ready to go with the project inside of a year anyways. But we're happy that the state has this, and it's a funding source that we might be able to compete in. So stay tuned on that. We'll see what we can do with that. But we're actively engaged in making sure that we're part of that program if at all possible.
Do you have an idea what the formula is they're working on?
No.
Okay.
Still too early to say. It's also worth noting the state got almost $2 billion a year, I believe it was. Is that right, Carl? Yeah, there's no billion. Oh, yeah, I see the B now with my glasses on. That's a huge boost to the state in terms of maintenance of the highway system. Carl and I were talking about that. SB 1 also, and some other legislation also requires the state, as they develop their new shop programs, to work closely with local agencies. So they've already begun to have a lot of discussions with us, and we look forward to working with them on identifying priorities on the state highway system in Tuolumne County. The STIP, I'll talk about in the next agenda item, but the good news is that with the paybacks from the general fund from the state, as well as fixing the state gas tax and some of the new revenues that they expect, there's a lot of new money in the STIP, and 75% of that funding goes out to the regions, and our estimate from the state is we'll have about $6.9 million available to program, and we'll talk about that more in the next agenda item. So that's good news that the voters can expect things to start happening soon in that regards. Local streets and roads pretty much saved our community resource agency road department this year. They were really down on their funds. The good news is it's really helped them out. The bad news is that for the first year, it's almost status quo with prior years in terms of funding. But in subsequent years, we'll see that the numbers grow to $3 and $4 million per year. That's going to have a huge benefit to our local road system and maintenance in that regards. I need to point out that the CTC is working on guidelines, and in that guidelines, there will be a reporting process for both Caltrans and local agencies on how they're spending those dollars. It's supposed to be a very transparent process that's all internet-based, so the public can look within their community what's happening with the dollars that are being generated in my community. And they're talking about pictures of roads before and after conditions, so the public really understands where the money's going. So that'll be, I think, really important. Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This one generates $250 million per year. They're working on the guidelines. They expect to have the guidelines done in December. We are fortunate enough to have recently received some funding from the state to develop a corridor plan for Highway 49 stretching out from Jamestown up through Sonora all the way to Columbia College. First, I want to say that we've got the state to agree we should not move forward with that project. We're ready to go right now, but we're going to hold up until the CTC's guidelines are in place. So we make sure that the dollars are spent on a plan that fits the CTC's criteria. That'll allow any projects within that plan to perhaps compete for some of the funding in the Congested Corridors program. And then secondly, we also got the state to agree that at the time, we didn't have SB1 and didn't know that this was coming. We looked at Vision Sonora and some of the projects in the RTP as kind of the solution for traffic conditions on Highway 49 through downtown Sonora. However, because we might want to compete for some of these funds for something like a Greenlee Road extension or other projects, we felt it was important to add that back into the scope of work, and the state agreed with us on that. So we're happy about that. So that's important. Trade corridor enhancement account, we're keeping an eye on it, but frankly, I don't see us getting much money out of this. This is really for some of the major highways that are coming out of ports of LA and San Diego, Oakland, that sort of thing. And then the traffic congestion relief program. This is more or less closing out the traffic congestion relief program. There's no real new money there to go after. So that's an overview of SB1 and how we're trying to engage early on and then into the future. I'd be happy to answer any questions about SB1 at this point.
Sounds like you're on top of what's happening. Just keep us informed
Okay.
if something changes.
Will do. And there's no action required on this item.
Right. And are you or staff attending some of these workshops, Darren?
Yeah, I've attended many and will continue to. It's so don't be surprised if the travel budget grows a little bit this year. There's just so much out there, and you want to give input all the way along. The other day, right at the CTC workshop, there was someone who suggested that the rural funding pot on one of these programs, you should use the census information on defining what's rural, what's not. Well, of course, that was someone in an urban area that has rural components. That doesn't work for us because if you look at the census, Sonora is urban. Jamestown mostly is urban. Well, right where I'd want to spend all my congested corridor money is considered urban. I don't want to be competing with urban areas just because census called us urban in this particular area. So we got to give input and said, no, that's not going to work for true rurals like us. We need to find a different way of defining rural versus urban. So it's important to participate.
Darren, on the Greenlee Road extension, how does that fit in, as far as you know at this point anyhow?
With congestion.
Yeah, in regards to that congestion.
Well, we're gonna have to pay attention to how they define congestion. I think in that particular funding pot, there appears to be a rural set aside. And I think if it's truly rurals competing in that, sometimes they call some semi-urban areas rural. Or maybe it's out through farmland, but it's on a heavy commuter route, you know. That we might end up competing with some of those. So how well we'll compete, I don't know. But I feel if we're judged by truly rural communities, we'll compete well in that regard.
What is that break to be rural or urban?
They haven't defined it yet. That's what we're working on.
You still haven't.
You know, I'd love to see something like for counties of 100,000 or less. That would
Yeah.
really get all the urban guys out of it.
Yeah.
But you got to realize there are areas of LA for a county that stretch up into the desert, and they want to compete in the rural pot on some of those highways through the desert. San Bernardino does, San Diego does, they all want to. And they've been very good at getting the legislator to agree that that's the way it should be.
Because there's more of them.
And they've incorporated rural.
The numbers
into
don't work in our
urban.
favor.
Yeah.
They've made the rural areas urban.
Yeah. So, but the good news in that program, there's also some there by formula. So we'll see.
So I have a question regarding that. Are these dollars just for the planning side, or are these dollars for a complete project? In the-
Pretty much. Well.
The congested corridors program.
Oh, okay. I believe that's all capital, and that
It's all capital?
capital funds. Now, maybe sometimes what they do in these programs, they'll allow you to program so much for planning purpose to develop the corridor plans. But they've had a big infusion in other grant programs for planning that's just come out. So I think they're going to lean on those planning programs, got a big infusion of dollars to put the plans together and save these pots for more capital expenses,
So
construction.
this would be for design, environmentals, and actual project?
I think that's,
Okay.
you can count on most all of that to be true. There might be some money in there for what we call project development cost. But planning, I think, will be done with other funds. Just like we secured a fund to do a corridor plan. It's a planning grant.
Right.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Public comment? All right, seeing none, moving on to item 4. Review the 2018 State Transportation Improvement Program, fund estimate, and funding priorities of the 2018 Regional Improvement Program.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, SB1 has provided new funding to the State Transportation Improvement Program with repayment of past loans from the general fund, stabilization of the existing fuel taxes, and increased transportation funding through new gas taxes that will be phased in over a 3-year period. As I mentioned earlier, some of those funds flow into the State Transportation Improvement Program, and under legislation that occurred way back in 1998, I think it was SB 45, those funds are divvied up on a 75-25% basis. 25% goes into an interregional pot for Caltrans and the CTC decide the best use of those funds, and 75% goes to regional agencies such as the TCTC on a formula basis. With that formula applied, we have programming capacity to a maximum of $6,907,000 through the year 2023. It's the first year in a while we've had a plus number to work with, so that's very encouraging. Likewise, the ITIP, the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program, has over $713 million in it. The purpose of this item is, A, to let you know how much money is available to this agency to program, but also we're going to need to submit a regional transportation improvement program to the CTC with our proposed projects and how much funding, or where we want to spend funding, and perhaps even a request for ITIP dollars. But there's a lot of lead up to that point, and that point is December 15th we need to be in, so we need to have it on our November agenda. And I need to be working with engineers and project managers to identify project scope, schedule, and cost to plug into the RTIP so that we can adopt it in, probably look at a draft if we get a chance in October, adoption in November, submit it to the CTC for their December deadline. So what we've done is looked at where we are on past projects, past commitments, and then looking to the future and using the regional transportation plan to guide us in that. So that said, we identified, of course, Peaceful Oak Interchange as a high priority. We're really fully funded on that project. And it's scheduled to begin construction in 2019. We would love to move it forward, but the problem we have is that we thought we were going to see SB1 or something similar to that this time last year. And so we did everything we could, or perhaps even sooner, we did everything we could to push the project forward to ready to list, and Caltrans did a fabulous job on that, and we were well positioned for any new money to come along. It didn't happen in a timely way. SB1 didn't get adopted until May. In the meantime, we've had 2 permits expire. They're going to take about 9 to 12 months to renew. They're Army Corps permits. Caltrans is working on that. They got the go-ahead. So our ability to move the project forward at this point really isn't there anymore, by happenstance, I guess you could say. But we're fully funded and don't need to worry about that project. Next up is...
So, question that
Sure.
We've got that fully funded, and that doesn't affect the 6.9 million.
Not at this point.
Okay.
I'm not even sure I want to ask Caltrans for a cost estimate update, because there's some, you have to think about it strategically without kind of laying it all out there. We might be best just waiting till, keeping some money in reserve, seeing where we are on bids, and then if need be, we can pony up more money. But as soon as you start doing new cost estimates, now you're committed to this bigger number. And sometimes if the bids come in under that big number, guess what? State's taking the big number, not the lower number. So that's just the way the rules all work. So we're going to sit pat, hopefully, with the estimate we have. Looking at our next priority is the Motorway Operational Improvement Project. Some might know it as this section of roadway, formerly 108, between Peaceful Oak Road and the new signal light up at the end of Stage 2 of the bypass. Used to be a state highway. It's been relinquished back to the county through the relinquishment agreement. We had that project, let me back up and say, typically funding for that type of project is included in the bypass funding. It was not. So we added it to our Regional Transportation Improvement Program after the fact to cover those costs. And then in subsequent years, the state had a deficit in funding due to the gas tax problems that we were having. There was a minus $754 million spread across the state in the State Transportation Improvement Program. What we were able to do in regards to Motorway Operational Project was maintain the funding for environmental design and right-of-way. So the project is being worked on, but we pushed construction dollars out with a commitment in the next opportunity to bring the construction dollars back into the program. So it was a $1.7 million project. I have to look at my number there for construction. Let me open up my attachments real quick. Yeah, I'm seeing, maybe I don't have that information. It was about $700,000 or so in construction, with a 1.7 million, my numbers aren't adding up. Anyways, it was $1.7 million project. In speaking with the engineers as they worked through design, there's retaining walls potentially required so that they don't have to get right of way. There are additional pavement sections that are thicker than what they originally estimated on. The project's starting to look like a $2.8 million project. That's still being worked on, but that would be a significant takedown on the $6.9 million that we have available.
So, but we wouldn't want to start that until the ramps are built anyway, would we?
Right, I think there's a timing issue there. They really can't start on it until about 2020, just from a delivery standpoint. They're so overburdened in Public Works or CRA.
It looks like we're going to have to do some sort of maintenance out there, Duke.
Yeah. So that would be my recommendation, is that we recognize that as a big commitment. Probably also worth mentioning is that in the cooperative agreement between Caltrans and the county, the Caltrans committed $1 million. So we're looking at going back to Caltrans and asking for that $1 million to keep those costs in check, or at least not the cost, but keep our commitment in check. Then finally, we have an opportunity to start the next major state highway capital improvement project. We look to the RTP for guidance in that regards. I think you know that stage 3 of the bypass we've determined in the RTP is a lower priority than some other projects in the county. The highest priority major capital project on the state highway is Highway 49 108 through Jamestown. We certainly all the way from Stockton Road in Sonora all the way out to really the West County line, there are many, many needs on the state highway. But that is the most critical segment there. It's a state highway that serves as a main street, but doesn't have a single safe pedestrian crossing on it. There's no sidewalks, there's no bike lanes. We've had some fatalities out there with the pedestrians. It's very congested, particularly on weekends where we have a lot of tourist traffic. So we would like to move forward with that project, and that's really the biggest question for you tonight, is if you want to go ahead and give us the go-ahead establishing that as a priority in our RTIP. And if it is, we'll begin discussing with Caltrans, how do we move forward, and likely what we're going to need to do is prepare what we call a project study report. So we would fund a project study report. The project study report allows the engineers and other folks, you put together a project development team of all the critical units, so to speak, and they identify what the scope of work needs to be, what the cost is estimated to be, and what the schedule would look like. That will give you a much better idea of what your costs are. The RTP looks at it, and I might point out that we're talking about the segment that starts on the eastern side of Sierra Motors, right on through 5th Avenue, down to Rawhide, past Rawhide, to just a little bit past the West Main Street to Jamestown. That's a pretty good segment there. Our RTP estimates that at $13.5 million, I believe. That number won't hold. I don't know. It's not likely to go down, but how much it goes up, we'll see. Especially with construction costs going up the way they are. And I'd be remiss not to mention that with SB 1 providing so much funding around the state, over the next few years, we can expect construction costs to go up a lot. So get ready for that. So anyways, we think it's a good project. We recognize there are needs in the city of Sonora, congestion and whatnot. We hope to address those in other ways. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
It seems logical that it ties in with what we're doing down there with the Rawhide Bridge and 5th Avenue.
Yeah, it's some people will probably at one point say, wow, you built all those improvements at 5th Avenue and Rawhide and then you didn't do the highway. Or maybe perhaps when you come in and do the highway, you're having to tear some things out. But we've worked with Tanya and Duke and to the maximum extent possible, they're going to design their project to accommodate the ultimate widening on the highway, but there will be some things that have to be tore out, removed, and replaced and whatnot. But, she's assured me things like where the traffic signal controller box goes will be definitely out of the way and things like that.
Darren, that was the first priority. What was the second priority on the list? I
The
don't
second priority was basically Greenlee Road extension as far as major capacity projects go, and I say that generically. It's not a state highway project. It certainly benefits the state highway, and there might be an argument to be made to use some state funds to build that project. But we envision that project always to be built with traffic impact fee program funds.
But if we take that approach, the likelihood of when would it get built?
Well, Alex might be here to correct me because I don't remember everything perfectly, but I think our RTP said that we'd be building the widening in Jamestown by about 2030. Clearly, SB1 has allowed us to move that up forward and begin that process sooner. Unfortunately, Greenlee Road extension was all the way out to 2040. Again, we might have an opportunity to move that forward as well. Certainly, if we had more development going on and infusing funds into the regional traffic mitigation account, that would facilitate it.
Are those the only dollars that are available to do the Greenlee Road extension?
I think generally you've got the regional traffic impact fee program, you've got RIP shares you could potentially use, and then we saw the congested corridors fund and maybe some of the partnership funds could also be leveraged. You can always hope for some sort of federal demonstration project or something like that, but those are the main ones that I can point to at this point in time.
Because as far as mitigation dollars, what kind of development is going to happen out in that area? Or does the county even know of any that's going to happen out in that area in the next 10, 12,
the way
15,
our
20 years?
fee program works, and certainly the city's benefited from it, is that everybody pays into a general pot that can be used for projects countywide. So you're collecting countywide, you're spreading them out on your highest priorities countywide. It's not necessarily related to a specific project nearby to that location, unless, of course, something like there's a plot of land north of Greenlee Lyons intersection. I think the county is looking at rezoning in their general plan from, I think it's ag to single-family residential or something there. If that developed, certainly they'd build a piece of it. We'd require that to be built as part of access to that subdivision.
Right.
And that would greatly reduce the cost of the project. I think we've estimated that project at about $15 million. So maybe you lop off a considerable portion with a development. But other than that, little piece there, I don't see a lot of development in that specific area.
But there's a lot to go through before actually that road can be built based upon the fact that it's private property that the Greenlee Road extension would go through. So are there even any dollars available to begin that process?
Well, I'd have to look at Tim and say, after you've done your Greenlee-Mono intersection, what do you have left in the account at the city? And likewise, the county potentially could, may have some dollars left over in their fee program to maybe initiate an environmental impact report that would help identify the alignment and then allow you to start preserving the right-of-way. Those are the dollars I could point to at this point. And certainly if you can get it environmentally cleared by the right-of-way, you're going to be in great shape for leveraging some competitive grants down the road for just construction dollars. CTC loves funding construction.
Does the Greenlee Road extension fall into the county's responsibility or the city's responsibility?
That is a unique situation in that The problem is in the city on a state route, but the solution appears to be all county. So that really calls for a lot of cooperation from 3 agencies. And, we know that the county's been super cooperative with the city on Mono widening and Greenlee Mono. I think they're excited about getting on with some projects that are a little more beneficial to the county areas for a while. But I think they've certainly laid a lot of very positive history here in cooperation in the fee program.
And Caltrans' solution to that was a bypass, not on the Greenlee Road side, but on the other side of Highway 49. I can't tell you exactly where it was, but I know there was some design for a bypass on the western side of 49.
Well, and Carl, I'd love to have you jump in, but I think our RTP represents the kind of common ground between us and Caltrans in the solutions for 49. Greenlee Road Extension will certainly benefit Washington Street more than any other project we could put in. Even if we put a 49 bypass in west of town, it won't draw the amount of traffic off of Washington Street that Greenlee Road Extension will, and certainly help the local circulation tremendously. The 49 bypass has generally been talked about running down the Rawhide Valley, connecting up with 49 west of Jamestown somewhere. I think that we've got a graphic in the RTP that generally, on a very conceptual level shows that. That's easily a $100 million project, and frankly has very limited benefit to downtown. I think our traffic models show maybe 2,000 cars a day would come off of downtown and use that. They've certainly got other options like Jamestown Road and Rawhide already, and they're not using that in a real heavy, meaningful, interregional way.
So of these 3 projects, Darren, the Peaceful Oak is fully funded, but it's scheduled for construction 2018-19, but it probably won't happen then? Is that
No,
what
I
you're
think
saying?
that's when it'll go during that time.
That's when it will happen.
Yeah.
And then the Monoway Operational Improvement Project, it was fully funded, but now it's only got dollars for design, environmental, and right-of-way funding?
Yeah, I think it was fully funded in the 2014 STIP, and then it only had partial funding in the 2016 STIP, and here we are in the 2018 STIP. We want to bring full funding back in.
So that'll be the dollars from the STIP for 2018 would go towards that project? is
Yeah,
what
and
you're
that would
saying.
leave some in reserves.
Right.
And you
Okay.
can certainly just park money in reserves, which is what we've done in building East Sonora Bypass. We saved up over $20 million for stage 1. It was a $70 million job, and the state kicked in the rest out of their interregional pot. And then we did something similar to that on stage 2. I think we saved up $14 million or some relatively small amount, and they kicked in the rest of $50 million. So that's the way you get it done. You save your money and you get all your plans done, and then when the moment's right, you make an ask, and hopefully they see the wisdom in your project.
And then the Jamestown widening, it says here that the next 2 will take at least 2 STIP cycles to complete. So would that be 2019 and 2020?
2020, there is no 2019.
Okay, so it'd be
It's
20
every 2 years you do a STIP cycle.
Okay, so 2020.
My hope is that by 2020, we would have PSR completed, environmentally cleared. Well, we'd know what the project's going to cost, and we may do after the 2018 STIP maybe an amendment to fund design and environmental to get the project going, and then perhaps in the 2020 STIP, we've still got, between new money and reserves, maybe $8 million or so combined towards the project, and we ask for an ITIP contribution for the remainder. That would kind of just be a general where we're going here. And if we could possibly even throw some developer dollars in, we might get into that congested corridor partnership funds.
So what do you need on, from the council on this item 4?
I'm just looking for consensus on supporting the Regional Transportation Improvement Program strategy and the prioritization that I've outlined, so that we can move forward working with the county and Caltrans to get the projects, the pertinent information put together, and we can bring it forward in October in the draft RTIP.
And if we don't get consensus, then we're not going to be in the ballpark of getting some of this stuff done. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, we need to agree on what the priorities are. You know, if need be, I can certainly bring it back for next month's agenda, but I'd really like to start the discussions with Caltrans particularly.
And the work on 10849 has already begun to some extent.
Yeah, you're pretty well committed there.
It's just,
It's just waiting, it's letting the engineers for the county know we're serious, we need your
Right.
numbers. And then Caltrans, what can you come up with your $1 million, put the numbers together and put in an RTIP for you. And then after that, we'll know, we'll probably by then have negotiated with Caltrans, what's a PSR gonna cost? Who's the lead agency and all on that and whatnot. So we'll do a takedown for the PSR. You can anticipate it's gonna be a few $100,000. And then the rest will go into reserves. That would be the game plan.
okay. So do we have consensus on these?
Well, I think at this point in time, that makes the most sense.
We'll just keep-
Either that or stalemate, so.
We like
and
progress.
do nothing.
Well, that doesn't make sense to do nothing. So I would say that, I mean, I'm in agreement with it, with what's proposed. And I would just request that we keep looking at a solution in the, not the far future, but more in the near future for the congestion on Washington Street
Yeah.
and the safety of Highway 49 between Jamestown and Columbia. Those seem to be the two big issues that I hear raised.
Yeah, you know, I'm real concerned about the stretch of 49 between Sonora and Columbia. It's very narrow with no shoulders. Certainly our corridor plan's going to allow us to plan that better. I think it's going to be a very long time before we can throw some of our RTIP dollars or STIP dollars at it. So I'll be looking to Caltrans to use some of their shop dollars to, at least on the state highway as they repave it, put in some shoulders for pedestrian and cyclist. At least Carl will be able to bicycle in from Columbia safely at that point.
And the other, the Sonora High School intersection, I haven't heard where, you know, what's happening there, so that's a dangerous intersection as well. But I'm in agreement with what staff recommend.
Okay, sounds like we have consensus.
Very well.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're very welcome.
Remember that, John.
Just remember how much money's been spent in the city. Just remember.
All right, we're going
We
to item 4.
we let your county people come and drive in the city.
So item 4, we're concluded. We're going to 5 reports.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple. I just want to say that I spent a few Friday afternoons having lunch at the Police Station Cafe, kind of observing traffic conditions out there, and I will say they are markedly improved from the past.
They got the other signs up.
They got all the signs up now.
I got to go up there and take a look.
I've seen almost nobody taking large vehicles up or down the old grade. The people that we have seen.
That is just so boring. not
I
to
know
see.
that, I know they're out there.
There was one the other day.
I know they're out there, but if I sit there for an hour and I don't see any, that's way better than what past has been. And then very few people, getting confusion with that one more added signage. I did see 2 people my last time out come up the new grade and then turn down the old grade. You could see they're clearly Yosemite tourists and one poor guy did that whole loop and then did it a second time. I couldn't. I didn't stick around to see if he did it a third. But generally,
Over now.
thank you, Caltrans, for everything you've done out there. And
Major,
yeah, it's
really, quite a difference.
yeah. And while we're on that, hopefully you guys are still looking at a left turn pocket at the top of the grade for your shop program. Speaking of the shop, they are doing, and you've probably seen it already on the local media, new priest grade turnouts are being paid. That's an item that this group asked for, I don't know, 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
Caltrans
It's
studied
been
it,
about that
and they
long,
committed
yeah.
to it, and now it's going to construction.
Yeah, it's been at least 3 years.
I've lost track.
But I had my first
goes by so
phone call complaining about it, about the work being done. The question was, well, how come they're doing it now when we're busy? So my simple answer is you can't do it in the wintertime.
Right.
So,
So nice.
that's my standard answer. I'm not going to argue with anybody, but thank you, Caltrans, for starting to work. It's going to be good once it's done.
And then we did hear this morning at the chamber from Kenny Weeks that they're looking at finishing up the work on the bridge over Lake Don Pedro a little bit early. I think I heard October. Is that what you heard?
I didn't hear a month. I just heard early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good news. That's all I have for reports.
That's all?
Just those two things. Been up in Sacramento
I thought you
a
were
lot,
going to
though.
explain the financial side of that item 4 or 5. Well, my eyes were getting blurry looking at all those numbers.
Oh,
Max, medium.
you want me to get back into that?
No.
No.
6.9 million is the number you need to know.
That's, yeah. The max, right?
Yeah, I guess I could have walked all through that.
That's all right. All right, looks like Carl from Caltrans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, to rewind back to the bypass of Sonora. The way the process works, we pretty much have two plans that interact with each other. There's the RTP, which is the TCTC's document, reflects the county's priorities and the city's priorities. And Caltrans does something called the Transportation Concept Report, or TCR, which essentially assesses the need for improvements to handle the capacity. So clearly, when Caltrans looks in their TCR at the needs for capacity on 49 through Sonora, we identify an issue there. At the same time, so the TCR is an input to the RTP, which becomes an input to the TCR, and we go around and around. So as to whether it's Caltrans' solution or the county's solution or TCTC's or the city's for that matter, we'd have to go back around through the plans until we found one that doesn't have it. Clearly, widening the highway through downtown Sonora is not an option, so, and bypassing Sonora on the east side would make the route shorter, and bypassing it on the west side would make it shorter, and on the east side would make it longer, so that isn't, so, you know, your choices are somewhere along Jamestown or somewhere along Rawhide, and really what's in the plan is a feasibility study, which means, you know, it's a long, long way out. And so when we do that TCR and we note that we can't accommodate the capacity need of the highway through downtown Sonora, you know, at a level of service D or I think we're looking for D in that particular case, and we're not even close. We simply have to note in that report that we can't meet that need on the alignment. So if you see that in the TCR, that doesn't necessarily mean it's Caltrans' solution. It's kind of what's, as we've gone around and around through that cycle, that's the solution that hangs out there. As far as reporting, Darren.
So we're still at a level, what, A for in downtown Sonora?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, are we completely F, or are we ever E? It's,
You're
you reach the
right.
point
You're
where
right.
We're-
Night.
Yeah.
it's not that much worth commenting on it at
Yeah.
some point. You know, there's no way to really change it much without going to that kind of a solution, so.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's an F in many times of the day. Whether your various calculations and analytics show an F or not is become another issue. Because it's so hard to figure in things like people in crosswalks and friction factors like parked cars and things like that complicate things. In the urban areas, they don't look so much at F anymore. It's F1, F2, F3, which is basically the number of hours a day it's operating at level of service F. So we might be even an F2 in Sonora or
Agreed.
something. So it's an F in my opinion.
Yeah. It's not that there's nothing that can be done to affect it, but it's the middle of a town, and that's the way it is. And of course, when you talk about a bypass, then you talk about a whole lot of other impacts that, none of those are easy. So, Darren hit on SB1, which is my big item too. I will try not to duplicate too much where he was going. We have the ATP augmentation, which is coming up very soon. So the county and the city should be looking at any applications that were submitted in the last cycle and repeat those if they're able to support getting them done. Then cycle 4 will follow. The call for projects, I believe, is going to be around January or February. So that'll be the spring of next year. And that will be essentially SB1 adds $100 million to a program that was $125 million previously. So it's a little less than doubling it. The other one that we're seeing kind of a similar approach to is our planning grants. So you're familiar with our planning grants. That's how we funded Vision Sonora. That's how the 49 Complete Streets corridor that is currently funded is where that money comes from. That program, I think in the last cycle there was $9.3 million available for the year. That's being augmented with $25 million per year. So that is a huge increase in what will be available for those grants. In addition to that, and so that's $25 million per year for the 10 years projected for SB1. Also, there is another program called the Climate Change Adaptation Plan, or planning grants. That will be $20 million over a 3-year period. So that'll wind up being $7 million, and $6 million in the third year. The rulemaking for that, the guidelines are being developed currently, and we have kind of the same problem, or the problem. Who needs problems like more money? We have the same issue as with the ATP. There's money available for the current, what was already funded. The grant cycle that, the 17-18 grant cycle was already funded, but now there's $25 million to add to that. So there's an augmentation call that will be coming. The guidelines are expected in September with the call for projects. The applications are expected to be due October 20th, and awards would be in December. That will be followed up with the normal call, which we would have expected to be pretty much on that same timeline but that call will come in probably January with a deadline somewhere around February, and then awards in May. There is also a potential for formula distribution of some of that money. So if you're adept at adding things up in your head, you can start at 9.3 million that our planning headquarters would have to distribute between September and May, which is usually kind of our cycle, is we would have our deadline somewhere on October, November, and then the awards would be announced in May. Well, now we're talking 50 million plus 8.3 million to pass out in that same time period under the augmentation plus the regular call. So there is some push to do some formula distribution simply because we don't have the staff to run a program like that, and also because everybody likes formula distribution anyway. To comply with SB1, it can't be a formula distribution like the regional planning assistance that the TCTC gets. They simply program it in the OWP. This would need to be reported probably similar to the low carbon transit program that we just discussed for Pinecrest. You need to have a proposal. You have the money. It's yours through a formula, but you're still going to have to, submit what the project's going to be for review to make sure that it's eligible under the program. So we don't know any of that yet. We will probably know in September when the guidelines come out, and there is a process to participate in that, and that's all available on our grants website. Easiest way is to Google Caltrans grants, comes right up. So there's a lot of opportunity for planning grants in the next year. The next item that I wanted to report, and I think Darren covered the rest of SB1. Well, the other thing I wanted to point out is there is draft guidelines out for the local streets and roads funding reporting guidelines. So essentially, everything under SB1 has a reporting and a performance measure accountability aspect to it. So I'm sure hoping that the county and the city have got this and are looking at it. This is essentially the draft of the rules for how you're going to need to report on the use of that local streets and roads funding. From what I can tell, it's going to be distributed much like the HUDA funds that are already used, formula distribution, but it's going to have those enhanced reporting requirements. Just some other things that are more or less news from the district and elsewhere. There's going to be, we participated in something from FHWA Federal Lands, which is called the Collaborative Long Range Transportation Plan. This was plans for access to federal lands. They're doing, we participated in that and made sure that we captured county, Caltrans, other needs, under that category of funding. Evergreen Road, Buchanan Road are being done by the county. We want to make sure that we caught all those needs, and we've done that pretty much at the local level. The people that are in charge of that program also listen to concerns about Yosemite, some of the other national parks in the Central Sierra, so they're doing a special focus meeting to discuss the Central Sierra region. So we've been invited for that. That'll be coming up, I think, later this month. And I believe Darren and the county are in that invitation. The district has been awarded some grant funding for our own use for what we're calling the integrated corridor analysis for 205, 5, and State Route 120. So essentially the corridor from Manteca over to where you join in to 580. The idea with this is to do some enhanced planning, modeling of that corridor, make sure that all of the ITS elements, the signal timing of the grid in general.
That doesn't include us, am I correct?
No, but we do drive that way, so I figure it's useful for us to.
Just making sure I'm not missing something.
This is not an action item for you guys, but it's a heads up that we're thinking about that. This can also include things like how do you handle incidents? Do you have alternative routes? And do you have things like ways to preempt signals to prioritize moving traffic under those kinds of conditions? So it's a good thing. The partnership meeting at the district, which was scheduled for later this month, has been moved. It has a conflict with the STIP meeting with headquarters and I think the CTC. So that's being rescheduled in August. I have promised you a presentation on our asset management program. Really what's happened with this is our asset manager has had SB1 thrown in his lap. So he's this is getting pushed out. It'll probably be further into the fall at this point. So my apologies for that, but we will try to get that to you. Then the last thing I had on my list was some of the concerns from Sonora. As you know, I attended a meeting with the business owners at the invitation of Councilman Segarini. I just wanted to give a little update on where we stand with that. I took comments regarding intersections through the town, Stockton Road, at the fairgrounds, the high school, Elkin, and the main intersection at Stockton Road and Washington Street. I've summarized all those. I've provided them to district staff just so that we're aware of them in aggregate. As you probably could expect, some of them are not necessarily consistent with each other. These are comments from the public. We need to kind of digest them and go through them. In that spirit, I met with Tim Miller and Darren today to kind of go through this. And my main, I did a little presentation before taking these comments, and the point I really wanted to get across is that this isn't stuff that Caltrans just does. This is stuff that we have partnerships with the city, county, and the TCTC that we work together to try to find ways to get things done, ways to get them funded, and to make sure that what we're doing meets the community's needs and doesn't cause unintended consequences. So in doing that, in looking to Tim and Darren is, where are our priorities here? What are we addressing in what ways, so that I can make sure that what I bring to the district is the most useful, and that what we do through the TCTC and through the local agencies is moving in the right direction. So my concern with this is simply that the TCTC is aware of kind of the summary that we developed of where some of these things are going, and to make sure, I know this is a report, you don't have an action on it, but simply to air this with you. So one of the bigger things was the intersection at Stockton Road and Washington Street. We had concerns from simply looking at making it clearer that the right turn lane on Washington is not a right turn lane anymore. It was changed because the trucks run into the building, so right turns were prohibited. Some people thought we should put some diagonal striping in that space to make it clearer. We had concerns about coordination of the pedestrian signals crossing Washington Street at Stockton Road with the signal phases on Stockton. In other words, if you have a green light on Stockton Road and you want to turn left, the pedestrians can move in that same phase. Do we want to try to deconflict that? Similar on the other side. So some of that has to do with the way it's set up now in the conventions. The signal for the left turn there is actually not an arrow. It's a regular ball signal. Normal operations under that configuration is that someone who's turning left without an arrow would need to expect that there's a pedestrian phase that's concurrent, that the pedestrians could be crossing. So my suggestion to that is simply that we take all of this. I talked to traffic safety. They're willing to look at a safety investigation. We can talk to traffic operations, see whether there's an approach where we replace those with arrows. We do have a right turn arrow. There's also a general green phase that includes right turns. So we can look at the whole thing, and I'll just bring that to the district. And in looking at that, we also have to look at the delay. So when we talked about removing the right turns where the trucks run into Sonora N, well, that's added to delay on Washington Street because now you can't filter out those right turning cars in the queue. So it's complicated. It's certainly something that we can look at, and that's something that I think warrants their consideration and in spending some time to look at it. And again, in doing that, making those kinds of changes, I think we need to include the city. We need to make sure that, you know, at the same time that we had people that said, gosh, there needs to be a no turn on red, we had people in the same meeting saying, oh, please don't do that, pointing to Restano Way and Mono Way where that's gone in. So it's never that simple, but certainly that's something that we can have them look at. We also have funding in place for the bus stop area in the vicinity of the intersection. So that will be going out to RFP. There's some potential for changes in how that intersection operates. Essentially, you know, we're looking at kind of between Stockton Road and Church Street. So that is in the pipe, and that affects this conversation. As we already discussed, we have the augmentation for the ATP. The Elkin project, intersection project, was part of that. So that is kind of covered by getting that back in for funding. The fairgrounds, we've already submitted the urban greening. The city has submitted. So we have some action there. Darren's suggestion was that we look at an ATP application for some of the Vision Sonora improvements through downtown. That call would be in February. That's not eligible for the augmentation because it wasn't submitted in the last cycle. And the school, Darren pointed out something to me that I hadn't seen before that I want to bring back to the district. The school is, as some of you may know, maybe not everybody, Vision Sonora includes a roundabout at that location, which would change the pedestrian works entirely. that, we haven't identified funding for that. But there may be some potential for some interim improvements there also. So that's what I have on my list. My concern is, I was invited back to the meeting. I don't really want to go back to the meeting saying that I don't really have anything to report to you. Certainly this is stuff I could report, but I don't want to report it if it's not an agreement with partners. So, can they give me any kind of consensus, or is that an agenda issue?
It's an agenda issue.
Yeah.
Well, just from a staff standpoint, we did meet with you earlier today, we being myself and Tim Miller, and we were largely in concurrence with everything you said, and so I can't necessarily speak for TCTC more than Tim can speak for the city council, but at least at a staff level, we have concurrence.
Okay. So I guess maybe the suggestion would be to not go to the meeting this month, and if we want to put this on an agenda, I don't know, it's between staff and electeds and the TCTC itself. I don't know where you want to go with that.
Well, at this point, it hasn't reached the level of city council, any decision-making on city council at this point in time. This is strictly in committee at this, call committee, the emergency meeting, committee meeting. And I, again, want to thank you for attending that meeting. And my object, or my goal for that, was to educate the merchants on the situation with downtown. Now, I think we've educated some, and we didn't educate everybody at that point in time. But, we'll work on that. And I don't see any need for you to attend the next meeting. I think we'll report what has been discussed up to this point in time, and we'll just take it from there.
Okay. And at the same time, as I suggested at the meeting, actually maybe I didn't suggest this at the meeting, they can watch this on TV. So if anyone is, you didn't have to write all that down. They can all watch, this discussion. And that's really my biggest suggestion to them is that tune into this process. I understand we sit here talking about budgets and it's not always the most exciting, but this is where the conversation happens and where the partners are present. And that's really the best way to kind of address that process. I think that's it, unless there's questions.
All right, ready?
If something needs to come to this council, it'll get agendized, correct?
Yep. Duke, come on up.
Thank you. I don't have as much to report as Carl did there, so try to keep it a little bit shorter. We've been dealing with a lot of storm damage of late, and Bond's Flat, as you know, is now repaired and back in shape, and and we did get that was paid for through TID, so that's a good thing. As far as storm damage goes, some of the bigger projects are Italian Bar and Marshall's Flat, and right now what we're looking at is those are the two most expensive items, and most likely those aren't going to be happening in this year, probably next year, due to the scope of those projects. But a lot of the other projects are moving ahead, and the funding is in place through FEMA. One of the things that I am currently looking at is a way to try to creatively fund and look at that Cedar Ridge evacuation route. When they had the fire up there and when we were dealing with the flood issues, the closures of Kuhn Mill Road, we've always known that, Cedar Ridge is kind of the low-hanging fruit down there, and we've got to try to figure out a better way to deal with that. So I am working with Randy Hanvelt and others to, CAL FIRE and others to see what we can do. Currently, the Fifth Avenue project is moving ahead. Buchanan is currently, which is a $17 million project. Carl mentioned the FLAP funds. We do have two. We have the Buchanan and Evergreen. Buchanan's moving ahead. We're doing the utility relocation as we speak. So the plans are, I think, at 100%, and we're moving ahead with that. The Fifth Avenue signal is moving ahead, and I know that when you talked about the ATP projects, Darren talked about it. One of the projects that we had previously applied for under the ATP was along Fifth Avenue to tie it into the elementary school, and that is still the one that we think has the best chance of funding. So we're looking at that. A couple of projects that Darren and I have been working together on over the years, many years, is the excess lands. And I haven't heard when they've rescheduled that meeting. I know they canceled it once, and there is a real need to move ahead with that, and it affects, you know, we talked about the cost of the Monoway operational program, and some of that can be diminished with a little bit of cooperation with Caltrans on some of those excess lands that would eliminate the need to acquire land, and then just allow us to do a slope instead of a retaining wall. The other projects that we are moving ahead, Draper Mines coming next year. The SB1 workshops, probably the one coming up closest is July 13th, and that's a workshop to look specifically at that funding. So that's one we're going to be attending. A couple other projects that we have moving ahead is Parrots Ferry paving and Yankee Hill Road. So I think that's it. Yosemite Junction, did you mention that one, Darren? No new news, okay. So that's it.
Any questions for Duke?
When we went up there to the top of Old Priest Grade, Caltrans had one item that they mentioned that they were going to follow through on. As I remember it, it was outreach to the RV rental places and to talk to some of those GPS people that had those units. So, but as a general rule, when we were there, it was much improved over the last time.
Darren, is there anything we can do to move this excess property issue along, this right-of-way thing? Is that something to agendize, get a report? I mean, it seems like this has been hanging around for quite a while.
Over a decade, since completion of stage one. You know, we've moved the bar in some areas in terms of getting them environmentally cleared, which took funding to environmentally clear them. It's kind of a strange thing with the state. You know, if we have excess property, we would sell it.
Right.
And then when somebody wants to develop it, they got to go through the environmental process. In this case, the state is required to clear it themselves just for the purpose of selling it, not even knowing it might go there someday. So they didn't have budget for that. We were successful in getting some budget for them in that regards. You know, I'm seriously frustrated. We've hired consultants that bird dogged it for a year or two, and they got frustrated enough they said we give up. We don't want to work on it anymore. We do have a meeting coming up. The good news, well, I won't say good news, but there is a new head of right-of-way for District 10. Hopefully, that will bring a little more of an expeditious approach to getting some of these excess properties sold off.
See if they would agree to a coming up agendized report.
Okay.
I mean, this has
Frankly, I
been
think
this has been taking way too long.
I'd love to see Berry Hill or, excuse me, Senator Berry Hill or Assemblyman Bigelow maybe put some legislation together to allow our TPAs to be the lead. If the Caltrans can't sell it within a certain time frame, let the locals sell it. You know,
Okay.
and just, the money stays in the corridor anyways.
Right.
Just, but
Yeah, but you only get the
somebody
money
that has a
when it
local
sells.
motive, you know, and wants to get it done.
It'd be simpler just to have it transferred to the local jurisdictions.
I think state law prohibits that, but again, our legislative representatives might be able to help us, because we've gone nowhere or
Right.
fast, that's for
There's
sure.
property sitting out there that,
You know, I'm
some
happy to
people
see a
want.
couple of realtor signs on some of those parcels for sale. But It's one of the more frustrating things in my area, and Duke, will say the same.
okay, let them know we're interested in moving
Okay.
this snowball uphill.
All right.
All right, with that, looks like Tuolumne County Transportation Council is adjourned. Thank you very much.